So I decided to do this video because I saw a comment on my Instagram where a reader said they didn't know I came from indie, which was very interesting to me because for a very long time, since 2018 to like 2021, that was my identity. And I absolutely love being an indie author, and I love so many elements of being an indie author. But I also think it shows how much my readership has grown. So I thought it would be helpful to share my story. Hope you find it inspiring. Felt inspiring at the time, though I think it will sound very similar to a lot of people's stories now, which is a very cool thing. So I'm not going to go all the way back to when I was 13 and I read The Lord of the Rings and I decided I wanted to be a world famous author. I'm going to fast forward a little bit to 2014 when I published my first young adult book, and it failed miserably. I went ahead and I published a second book in that series, and it also failed miserably. But I think what was most important at the time is I realized that I needed to do more work on my craft. So I paused and I went to more writing conferences, I read more books, I joined more critique groups and had critique partners. I did all the same things I had done before, but with an emphasis on just trying to improve craft. I think prior I'd really focused on how to craft a plot and craft an actual story, but I hadn't worked on my words. That was my emphasis for the next wave of improvement. So I did that, and I decided that I would apply everything I learned to this book I called When Stars Come Out. And you might be familiar with that book. It did end up getting traditionally published, but it was originally self-published, and it was a book I had worked on since high school, which is really wild to think about, that I kept some of these stories with me for so long, but I think a lot of us do that. So I was applying what I learned to When Stars Come Out, and I was very proud of this book, and even the editor I had hired at the time had told me how much my writing had improved, and I thought maybe I can get an agent with this book. So I queried and got rejections, and I didn't query a lot because by this point I really feel like I had learned what mattered most to me when it came to writing books, and that was my happiness. Writing queries and waiting to be rejected made me hate the process of writing, and I did not want to go down that path. So I just decided then and there I was going to self-publish. To maintain my love of writing, self-publishing was for me. And it was a very bold choice considering I had such negative feelings about the books that I had published in 2014 and 2015. But I did it, and I was so happy. When Stars Come Out had 8 pre-orders and no one talked about it, but it didn't matter because I was so happy, and I already had another idea in my head that I had been mulling over since 2016, and I just knew that it was the right time to jump on it. And it was for a book called A Touch of Darkness. So A Touch of Darkness was my first romance novel, and I remember reading a book called Romancing the Beat by Gwen Hayes, and I just followed every rule she gave me because I didn't want to mess this up. And I feel like romance has they have very specific rules for their books, and if you read A Touch of Darkness, you can definitely see that I followed this outline like to a T. Well, while I was writing A Touch of Darkness, I just had the best feeling about it. I just knew it was going to be the book that changed my life. Not only that, I had so much fun. I let go of everything that gave me pause, that made me afraid, and everything that I thought maybe readers would hate. It didn't even come into my brain. I wrote this basically for the fun of it and for me. I didn't put A Touch of Darkness up for pre-order because, well, I don't know, it just didn't really make any sense at the time. I felt like I didn't have a readership. I felt like the marketing would come after, if that makes sense. So I just put it out in the world and then asked myself the question, where are fandoms made? As a librarian and as a fangirl, I knew that I went to specific places when I wanted to experience my fandom in other mediums. The answer to that for me was Pinterest and Tumblr. And I had noticed on Pinterest that people really liked to repin quotes, and they were very simple quotes. It was white font with a black background. So I uploaded a lot of quotes and linked my Amazon page on Pinterest. And it was really funny because at the beginning, people would say, I found this book on Pinterest. It was a very strange thing to see because, I mean, I don't know that I had ever seen that before, but it was working. So I was like, oh, look, my little librarian brain is a genius. And then on Tumblr, I had done experiments myself, and I noticed that the graphics didn't work so well, but the text just pasted into the post was perfectly good. It worked very well. And then the other thing I did is let people read a part of the book on Wattpad. And this is why a lot of people thought that I came from the Wattpad space, because I did that. But I just wanted people to be able to get a taste of what they were going to buy, basically. Later, I took it down from Wattpad because since I was enrolled in KU, I think you could only have a certain percentage available for free on the internet. So I ended up having to modify like what people could read on Wattpad. But I think these were very effective ways to market my book, and when you hear the rest of my story, I think that you will agree. So the first year A Touch of Darkness was out, it made $2,000, which was the most money I had ever made from any of my books ever, and I was ecstatic. And I just knew the next year I would make even more money. I remember telling my CPA that, and I did. And when I started to notice that I consistently made over 10K per month, that's when I decided I was going to quit my full-time job as a librarian and become a full-time author. And I remember like there was some hesitancy from my friends. They thought maybe it could be a fluke, but I believed that that was the least amount of money I would ever make as an author, and I was right. So several things happened at once, or feels like they happened all at once in 2021. By this point, I had 4 books out. When Stars came out, A Touch of Darkness, A Game of Fate, which is Hades' point of view of A Touch of Darkness, which my readers had asked for by that time. A Touch of Ruin was out, and then A Touch of Malice was up for pre-order. And people were telling me that I went viral on TikTok, that I was viral on TikTok, and I did not know what that meant, because my extent of my knowledge about TikTok was that it was an app where people just lip synced to music. I did not realize that it was anything but that. So I was like, oh, that's cool. Meanwhile, I was noticing that my physical book pre-orders were exceeding my ebook pre-orders. And as an indie author, that is very unusual. You don't typically see that. We usually over-index in ebooks. And I was like, that's really cool. Then people started to tell me that I was in Barnes & Noble, which, you want to talk about something that was absolutely unheard of at the time. It was that. Because Barnes & Noble, in order to put me on their shelves, they had to support their competitor. My mind was blown. I started to go into different Barnes & Nobles. I went into my Oklahoma City one. I signed books there. They were gone in an instant. They created a form to take orders for signed books, actually, at the point, because they sold so quickly. And then one time I was in California and I went to the Grove Barnes & Noble. The buyer came out to talk to me, and she just told me about how they could not keep my books on their shelves. This was just like a moment of like surrealism. I could not, and I still don't know that I fathomed what really happened during that time in 2021. So I talked about pre-orders, and just to give you some context, a reminder, When Stars Come Out had 8 pre-orders, and then A Touch of Ruin had 199 pre-orders, and then A Game of Fate had like over 500 pre-orders. It was like 550 or something. A Touch of Malice had, I think, over 8,000 pre-orders, and this was just in ebooks. At the time, you couldn't put your paperbacks up for pre-order on Amazon, so you can see that in a very short amount of time, this was just months, my pre-orders had increased by thousands. I don't know, I cannot tell you why that didn't register with me, that many people were reading my books, but it just really didn't hit. And I don't think it hit until A Touch of Malice released, and I'll tell you why. It's because it was a fucking disaster. We uploaded the wrong file, and it had a lot of errors, and we had to go back in and fix them and then upload the new file, and I feel like that process took a while, and I just felt really bad because it meant that my readers didn't get the highest quality document. What it showed to me was that I needed help. So around that time, I started to reach out to agents and publishers, and they were reaching out to me, but it really didn't go anywhere. This is where I'm telling you that what's happening now was not happening then. So I had a couple of agents. One agent tell me that it was very unusual to make $10K per month as a traditionally published author, and that, it sounded like I was doing well on my own, so they didn't really know why I would want to transition into the traditional space, and really the only thing they could help me with were sub-rights, which are foreign rights, things like that, but they didn't really expect to, make an impact there. And then I had another publisher tell me they probably couldn't get me into any more Barnes & Nobles than I already was in. They told me I couldn't get into Walmart and Target. They said my kinds of books didn't really do well there. I had one agent tell me that the kind of books that I wrote did not work in the traditional space, and they did not work in the adult space. If I wanted to be in the traditional space, I would have to go into young adult first and then transition to an adult like Sarah J. Maas. They told me that because I wrote this mix of fantasy and romance, that readers of romance wouldn't understand the fantasy, and fantasy readers wouldn't understand the romance. And these were all things that I did not believe. What I believe is that they believed them. And I think you can tell that the industry just wasn't ready for us yet. They were not ready for indie authors yet. That was until I got an email from my now editor, Krista at Bloom. And it was so funny because when she emailed me, I was so skeptical of agents and publishers at this point. I had been sort of led to believe that they thought they could help me, only to be told that they couldn't help me. So I just went into it. I told her, I said, just so you know, I've talked to editors before and I'm just very skeptical. And she said, well, I hope we can change your mind. And so I went into this meeting with Bloom. Instead of telling me all the things they couldn't do, they told me all the things they could do. They were exactly the opposite of what other people had told me. So they said, yeah, we can get you into more Barnes & Noble stores. These are the stores you're in. These are the ones that we think we can get you into. We can also get you into indie bookstores and libraries. We can get you into Walmart and Target. They basically contradicted everything I had been told by the industry. And then they did it. When I eventually signed with them. I feel like the same thing, a similar wave of indie authors coming into the traditional space happened around 2014. It was when Colleen Hoover, Abby Glines had, self-published on Amazon CreateSpace at the time. Ebooks were just getting really popular, and there was a wave of authors who came from indie into the traditional space, and that sort of went away for a little while, and I feel like this is the second wave. And I do feel like I was at the forefront of that second wave, and I feel like that because of what I had been told at the time, including that from an agent who told me people in the industry are not really taking on self-published authors anymore. And that was despite all the stats that I could give them, all of my sales that I could give them. So it's just a very interesting situation. But at the end of the day, what I would tell you as an author, as an aspiring author, just find a way to yes. And just because people are telling you things about their world, it doesn't have to be your truth. Despite everything people were telling me about the reality of traditional publishing, I never believed that that was going to be true for me, and it wasn't. So now I have been with Bloom for 5 years, and I have hit many bestseller lists, and I have been in a lot of bookshops, and I have a lot of foreign deals, and I still get to have the collaborative element that I loved from indie publishing, but with a lot of help and support, and it has been the best experience. I hope you found this video helpful. If you guys want to know more about my story, if you want me to go into depth on anything, just let me know. But I felt like this was a pretty decent overview of how I got where I'm at. All right, I'll talk to you guys soon. I love you. Bye.